I didn't go looking for revenge. I went looking for what was mine, and somewhere along the way, I guess I stopped caring about the difference. It all started the day my father died, and I know that sounds dramatic. But if you've ever lost someone who built something with their bare hands, something real, something that actually meant something, you'd get it. My dad wasn't rich, not even close, but he had land, 50 acres of stubborn, fertile ground out in what used to be called Red Hollow County, a place where dirt sticks to your boots and people still shake hands like it matters. He used to tell me, over and over, like he was trying to carve it into my skull, this land isn't just dirt, Caleb, it's your future. And I believed him, I really did, because I watched him bleed for that place, watched him fix broken fences in the rain, watched him wake up before sunrise just to keep it alive. So when he passed, I didn't think there'd be a fight. I thought there'd be grief, maybe some paperwork, but not a war. Then came the reading of the will, and that's where everything snapped. I remember walking into that office, the kind with fake wood panels and a coffee machine that hadn't been cleaned since 2003, and sitting across from my stepmother, Diane, who suddenly looked a whole lot more polished than I'd ever seen her, like grief had done wonders for her wardrobe, and next to her, her two sons, Marcus and Eli, dressed like they were about to close $1 million deal instead of bury a man. And then there were the lawyers, always a bad sign when lawyers show up smiling. The attorney cleared his throat, started reading, and within about 30 seconds I realized I wasn't in my father's will anymore. Not the land, not the house, not the equipment, nothing. Apparently, there was a revised version, conveniently signed just weeks before my dad died, transferring everything to Diane and her sons. I remember laughing at first, like actual laughter, because it sounded ridiculous, like someone pitching a bad movie plot, and I said, okay, where's the real will? And that's when Marcus leaned back in his chair, gave me this little smirk, and said, this is the real one. Man, you should have stayed closer to home. That line stuck with me, not because it was clever, but because it told me exactly what this was. This wasn't paperwork, this was strategy. I asked for proof, I asked about witnesses, dates, signatures, and they had everything lined up, every document stamped and notarized, their lawyer talking in that smooth, rehearsed tone designed to make you feel like you're already losing before you even open your mouth. And Diane, she didn't even look at me, just sat there, calm, almost bored, like she'd already moved on to redecorating the house she just stole. Then Eli chimed in, real casual, you'll land on your feet, Caleb, it's just business. Just business. Yeah, that one hit different, because my father's life wasn't business, it was sacrifice. But I didn't yell, I didn't flip the table, I didn't do any of the things they probably expected. I just sat there, took it in, and nodded like I understood, because in that moment, I realized something important. If they were this prepared, this confident, then whatever they did, it was planned way before my father died. And I wasn't ready for that kind of fight, not yet. So I walked out of that office with nothing but a folder of lies and a head full of questions, and just like that, I was homeless. No land, no inheritance, no backup plan, just a cramped studio apartment above a laundromat in the city, where the walls vibrated every time someone ran a spin cycle, and the air smelled like detergent and disappointment. I got a job at a land survey office, not because I had some grand plan, but because it paid enough to keep the lights on, and I figured at least it was still connected to land. Somehow, still connected to him. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and eventually, into 2 years. 2 years of silence. 2 years of people assuming I'd given up, that I'd accepted my loss and moved on, and honestly, I let them think that, because there's something powerful about being underestimated, about letting people believe you're broken when you're actually just watching. And that's exactly what I was doing. Watching, learning, digging through records that most people don't even know exist, property deeds, zoning maps, environmental reports, loan filings, the kind of stuff that doesn't look like much until you start connecting the dots. And one night, sitting at my desk with a stack of documents and a cheap takeout dinner going cold beside me, I saw it, the first crack in their perfect little empire. They had taken out massive loans against the land, my land, using it as collateral for a development project they called Silver Creek Estates, which, yeah, sounded fancy enough to attract investors who'd never stepped foot on a farm. Luxury homes, private roads, curated landscaping. They were planning to erase everything my father built and replace it with something sterile, something profitable. And here's the thing. They needed permits for that kind of project, a lot of them, environmental approvals, zoning changes, historical land use reviews, and suddenly, all those boring documents I'd been staring at for months started to mean something. Because I knew that land better than anyone. I knew what was buried in it, what lived on it, what had been quietly protected for decades without anyone making a big deal about it. My father didn't preserve that land for profit. He preserved it because he respected it. And that's when it hit me. Diane and her sons didn't just take the land, they took on something they didn't understand. And that was their mistake. All right, let me pause the story for a second, because this right here, this is where most people get played, and they don't even realize it until it's way too late. What happened to me in that lawyer's office? It wasn't just betrayal. It was a setup wrapped in something that looked legitimate. According to standard procedure, wills don't just magically change without a trail. There's supposed to be capacity checks, witnesses, sometimes even medical verification if the timing is suspicious. But here's the thing. If someone moves fast enough and they surround themselves with the right professionals, they can make something shady look airtight on paper. And once it's stamped and filed, challenging it becomes expensive, slow, and emotionally draining. Exactly the kind of fight most people can't afford to take on right after losing a parent. From a legal perspective, what Diane and her sons did, assuming everything was technically signed and notarized, falls into that gray zone where it might be morally wrong, but legally, it's just hard enough to contest that most people walk away. And that's not an accident. That's strategy. Now here's where it gets deeper. This is a psychological trap. They weren't just taking the land. They were controlling the narrative. Notice how they talked to me. Calm, dismissive, almost rehearsed. It's just business. That line wasn't for clarity. It was for dominance. It frames the situation in a way that makes you feel emotional, irrational, like you're the one overreacting while they're being reasonable. And once you accept that frame, even a little, you've already lost ground. That's how people like this operate. They combine legal cover with psychological pressure, and they wait for you to break before the real fight even starts. But here's the part they always underestimate. They assume the story ends when you walk out of that room. They assume silence means surrender. They assume time works in their favor. And most of the time, yeah, it does. Just not this time. So yeah, they thought I walked away. They thought I folded, packed up whatever pride I had left, and disappeared into the noise of the city like just another guy who lost and couldn't fight back. And for a while, I let that version of me exist because it made what came next a whole lot easier. See, by the time I found those loan records tied to Silver Creek Estates, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was calculating. Every document I pulled, every map I studied, every environmental note buried in some dusty archive. It wasn't random anymore. It was a pattern, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. That land. They thought it was just acreage, just numbers on a balance sheet, but I knew better. There were protected wetland zones running through the eastern edge, subtle, easy to overlook if you didn't grow up walking that soil barefoot. There were migratory bird habitats that showed up seasonally, never permanent enough to attract attention unless you knew exactly when to look. And buried deep in historical records, there were references to original settlement markers, nothing flashy, just enough to trigger preservation reviews if someone pointed in the right direction. My father never advertised any of it. He didn't care about grants or recognition. He just respected the land. But Diane and her sons? They saw none of that. All they saw was profit. And that's where I started building something they couldn't see coming. Night after night, I documented everything: photos, timestamps, cross-referenced reports, environmental codes, stuff most people would never bother with because it's tedious, it's boring, it doesn't feel like power. But trust me, it is. Real power isn't loud, it's detailed. And once I had enough, I didn't march into their office or confront them face to face. That would have been too easy, too predictable. Instead, I went quiet. Anonymous reports started landing in the inboxes of local environmental boards, historical preservation groups, even a couple of investigative journalists who were always hungry for a good developer versus community story. And I made sure the narrative was clear. This wasn't just a construction project. This was a violation waiting to happen. The response? Immediate. Permits got flagged. Reviews got delayed. Inspections started stacking up like unpaid bills. Suddenly, Silver Creek Estates wasn't a clean, exciting investment anymore. It was a risk. Environmental groups showed up, cameras in hand, asking questions Diane couldn't answer. Investors started pulling out, quietly at first, then all at once, like a row of dominoes tipping over. And the bank? Oh, the bank got nervous. Because here's the thing about loans. They don't care about your vision, they care about their money. And when that money starts looking unstable, they move fast. I kept watching from a distance, never stepping into the spotlight, just letting the pressure build. Marcus started calling in consultants, trying to patch holes in a sinking ship. Eli got sloppy. There were whispers of under-the-table deals, attempts to push approvals through faster, but all it did was dig them deeper. And Diane, she started showing up in public again, not polished this time, not confident, just tired. That's when I knew they were running out of time. And that's when I made my move. I didn't go after them directly. I went after the one thing they couldn't control, their debt. I reached out to the bank, introduced myself as a third-party investor interested in distressed assets, kept my tone neutral, professional, like this was just another business opportunity. And honestly, to them it was. They didn't care who I was. They cared about getting out clean. That loan tied to the land had turned toxic. Delays, legal complications, public attention. It was a mess. So when I offered to take it off their hands at 30 cents on the dollar, they barely hesitated. 30 cents, that's all it took. Years of my father's work, stolen, flipped, leveraged, and now reduced to a number small enough for me to buy back in one move. And just like that, I wasn't the guy who lost everything anymore. I was the guy holding the lien. Now, if you've never dealt with liens before, here's the simple version. They didn't own that land anymore. Not really. They were borrowing time, and time has a price. So I waited. I didn't rush it, didn't gloat, didn't even contact them. I just let the terms of their own deal do the work for me. Payments came due, and they missed them. Extensions were requested and denied. The bank was out, I was in, and unlike them, I had no interest in negotiating. When the default became official, I filed for foreclosure. Clean, legal, quiet. No drama, no threats, just paperwork moving exactly the way it was designed to. The day it all came together was at the courthouse, and I'll be honest, I almost didn't go. Part of me thought it would feel petty, or hollow, or just unnecessary. But I went anyway. And when I walked into that room, I saw them, Diane, Marcus, Eli, standing together, dressed sharp like before, but this time, it didn't fit. Their confidence was gone, replaced by something tighter, something desperate. Marcus saw me first, his face twisting like he couldn't decide whether to be angry or afraid. "You," he said, like the word tasted bad in his mouth. I didn't answer right away, just took my seat, let the silence stretch a little. Then Eli stepped forward, voice raised. "What the hell is this? You think you can just..." But the judge cut him off before he could finish. Because that's the thing about courtrooms, they don't care about your emotions, they care about your paperwork. And mine was perfect. Diane tried to speak next, her voice cracking, trying to argue, trying to explain, but every sentence fell apart under the weight of the documents in front of the judge. There was no loophole, no last-minute twist, no clever argument left to make. Just facts, cold, clean facts. And when the ruling came down, it wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, just a few words confirming what had already been decided long before we stepped into that room. Foreclosure granted. Ownership transferred. Just like that, it was over. Marcus swore under his breath. Eli kicked his chair back hard enough to echo. And Diane, she just stood there, frozen, like she was waiting for someone to tell her this wasn't real. But it was. They didn't just lose the land. They lost everything they built on top of it. The loans, the investments, the reputation, all of it collapsed in one clean motion. And me? I didn't celebrate, didn't say anything clever, didn't throw their words back at them. I just walked out, same way I did 2 years earlier. But this time, I wasn't leaving empty-handed. This time, I was going home. So, yeah, that's the story. And if you're expecting me to say it felt amazing, like some kind of movie ending where everything clicks into place and you finally get closure, I'm gonna disappoint you a little. Because what it actually felt like. Quiet. Not empty, not bitter, just quiet. I stood on that land again a few days later, same dirt, same wind moving through the trees, same uneven fence line my dad used to complain about, and for a second, it was like none of it had happened. But of course it had. Because the land didn't change. I did. And that's the part people don't talk about when it comes to revenge or justice, or whatever you want to call what I did. The lesson here is winning doesn't rewind anything. It doesn't give you back the version of yourself that trusted people blindly or believed that family meant safety. What it does give you is clarity. And clarity can be a dangerous thing, because once you see how systems really work, legal systems, financial systems, even family dynamics, you don't get to unsee it. According to standard procedure, everything that happened to me was valid. The documents were signed, the transfers were recorded, the loans were issued on paper, it was clean. But if you look closer, if you really pay attention, you start to understand that legality and fairness aren't the same thing. And that gap? That's where people like Diane operate. From a legal perspective, I didn't break any rules getting the land back. I used the same system they used, just more carefully, more patiently. I didn't outmuscle them. I outlasted them. And that's something a lot of people underestimate. They think power is loud, aggressive, immediate, but most of the time, real power is slow, quiet, and a little bit boring. It's reading documents nobody else wants to read. It's waiting when everyone else is rushing. It's understanding the game before you try to win it. But there's another layer to this, something deeper, something that doesn't show up in contracts or courtrooms. This is a psychological trap a lot of people fall into. The belief that revenge will fix the emotional damage. That if you just get even, everything will settle, everything will feel right again. And I'll be honest with you, it doesn't work like that. What it does is give you control, and control feels good, especially after you've been blindsided. But healing? That's a different process entirely. Standing there on that land, I didn't feel like I got my father back. I didn't feel like the betrayal disappeared. I just felt like the story had reached its end. And maybe that's enough. Maybe closure isn't about feeling better. Maybe it's just about knowing the fight is over. So if you're watching this and thinking about your own situation, maybe not land, maybe not family, but something that was taken from you, something that felt unfair, here's what I'd say, not as advice, just as experience. First, don't confuse silence with weakness. Sometimes the strongest move you can make is stepping back, learning, and waiting until you actually understand what you're dealing with. Second, learn the system. Whatever your battlefield is, legal, financial, professional, take the time to understand how it works, because most people don't lose because they're wrong, they lose because they're unprepared. And third, be honest with yourself about what you actually want. Do you want revenge? Do you want justice? Or do you just want peace? Because those are three very different outcomes, and chasing one while pretending it's another, that's how people get stuck. Me? I thought I wanted justice, but somewhere along the way, I wanted them to feel it. And maybe they did. They lost money, reputation, access. They got shut out of circles they used to walk into like they owned the place. Their names became a cautionary tale. Developers who cut corners, who tried to push through protected land and got burned for it. And if you think about it, that part had nothing to do with me showing up in court. That was the narrative, the pressure, the consequences of their own decisions catching up with them. I just nudged things in the right direction. So what's the takeaway? It's simple, but not easy. The world doesn't always reward fairness, but it does respond to strategy. You don't have to be the strongest person in the room, or the loudest, or even the most confident. You just have to be the one who understands how the pieces move. And once you do, you get to decide whether you play the game or walk away from it entirely. Now I'm curious, what would you have done in my place? Would you have fought it head-on, challenged the will, spent years in court trying to prove something that's almost impossible to prove? Or would you have done what I did, waited, watched, and taken everything back when they weren't looking? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd think. And yeah, if you stuck with me through this whole story, you probably already know what I'm about to say. Hit that like button, subscribe if you want more stories like this, and I'll see you in the next one.